Tim, who are the portrait artists that you tend to find yourself constantly looking at their work?
Well, for me, there's always been a few constants that have never changed over time. So, for example, Richard Schmidt is one. Probably Jeremy Lipking is top up there. It seems that every portrait he does is not only realistic and believable to the person, but it has a sensitivity to the values and a little bit of that French naturalist romantic feel to it, for sure. But then there's other painters dealing with more conceptual ideas within their portraiture that are really great. I really like what Rose Franson does when she gets to some of her allegorical portraits. Cesar Santos in his portraits as well. Um, and even there's so many great portrait artists out there. It's so hard to narrow it down. I look at a lot of the guys out of New York who are doing work, at sort of the Grand Central Academy School, and we're looking at Gregory Mortensen, for example, doing his portraits of the survivors in Haiti. Absolutely phenomenal portraits that are also both touching. Um, and so it certainly comes down to, again, I'm viewing it a little differently than a lot of students might view it, because I I sort of view any portrait artist not just on their technical skill set. In fact, it's very likely that I'll even appreciate or look at very much a portrait artist who doesn't already have a high skill level. That's sort of already a given. Like if they don't have a high skill level, I'm probably not going to be looking at them very much.
Mm-hmm.
So beyond that, it's what separates those artists out there who already have that super high skill level. And so we're looking at artists who are handling things in a different way, more sensitively, or telling an interesting story that I can also be engaged with as well. And for me, maybe I'm a bit of a romantic, and you can kind of see that in some of my figure paintings too. But I like to look at paintings that just kind of make me sigh and say, "Oh my gosh, that's just so beautiful." And those are the ones I want to hang up, not necessarily the epic ones or the really far out conceptual ones. It's really just more the beautiful ones that make me stop and hold me in my tracks. When I'm looking at my Facebook feed or Instagram feed or whatever that is, when I see a painting that just is so beautiful, I have to stop and spend 10 seconds looking at it. That's usually what I'm drawn to.
I don't think I've ever in my life been around artists who discussed and used that word beauty more. And I think it's really interesting. And the first time I heard one of the guys in the class with me uh, refer to beauty or say something like, I just want to make it beautiful. I want to make something beautiful. I thought it was a really strange thing to say because I personally think it's really kind of relative and it's different. It kind of annoyed me a little. What's your response to that?
Well, I can definitely see kind of your viewpoint, and but we have to be careful though, because that's sort of the viewpoint that launched modern art by saying, "Who are you to say what's beautiful? I make whatever I want. I think it's beautiful, so it's beautiful," kind of thing. But there is something about I think beauty that humans are attracted to, and to a degree, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And if I could say something like, or we could say something like, "Oh, that person is beautiful," that could certainly vary from person to person. But there are some inherent qualities, and it might not be about the individual features or the features specifically of an individual person. It could just be about the general quality of the paper or the general pose that's had, or the colors within the painting that we respond to on a more intimate level. And I do think that there is sort of a common shared idea to some degree of beauty in the world. And Scott Burdick really illustrates this point brilliantly in his video lecture. It's called "Banishment of Beauty." Basically, it's definitely something you should YouTube and look up, because it's 50 minutes or an hour of wonderful footage and great intellectually stimulating dialogue. sort of challenging what it is we deem worthy of beauty and whether or not that beauty is worthy of being saved. And one of the things kind of presented is first of all, kind of that viewpoint that you had. Is beauty in the eye of the beholder? Who's to say what's beautiful and what's not? But really, when we start to bring in the idea of what's not beautiful, can we start to agree upon what is beautiful? And if we look at some sort of modern artwork, like just a toilet, which is a famous work of modern art, and comparing it to something like a Bouguereau or a Monet painting or something like that, there's a strong majority of the population, and I would say it's probably well over 99% of the population, who would look at the more aesthetically pleasing, so to speak, painting of Bouguereau or Monet or whoever it is, and choose that as beautiful over the toilet. And so I think there is sort of a common vein of beauty running through us. And
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think you're right. I think Duchamp wasn't trying to say that the toilet was beautiful.
Right, that's true.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you that there's probably a certain standard, or I'm not sure where that comes from though.
From what I've read on the subject, it's mostly an evolutionary sort of thing. There are certain features that became more desirable that helped perpetuate certain aspects of the species throughout the last 10, 20, 30,000 years of its development. And even down to, actually, I think I was just researching the other day why females tend to have longer hair than males. Or more specifically, actually, my original inquiry was, why do humans have long hair on their head and nowhere else, which is different than a lot of other species of animals, really. And there were many, many factors involved, anything from climate change as we migrated out of tropical places, to sexual selection, to the, there's many, many reasons why changes like this can take place. But overall, we tend to, I think, migrate towards preserving that which we deem beautiful collectively as a species. Whether or not it's in individual people or in artifacts or structures, paintings, natural parks. We, for whatever reason, humans are drawn to things that we deem pretty. And obviously, we're not the only species that does this. Animals are attracted to other mates that have brilliantly colored fur or feather or something like that attracts them. And that's sort of I would say, or consider maybe a rudimentary form of beauty that animals have. And we sort of take that to the next level. Something that draws us, some inexplicable urge to be around things that are pleasing to the eye.
Do you think that changes culturally?
I think to some degree it might change a little bit culturally, but there's certain elements that run a strong similarity through all cultures. All cultures have, for example, like pottery, things like that they've worked to increase the aesthetic appearance of. And so we might look at pots made in, or bowls made in Africa versus Greece versus China, and all of them might seem really pretty to us. And they're all different in their own way, but all of them have a beauty. And it might be an inexplicable beauty, and it's something that's taken hundreds or thousands of years to craft and develop into the art of something as simple as a bowl or a pot. So perhaps physical characteristics of an individual certainly can change from culture to culture. We would definitely find a different type of female attractive in Africa than maybe Southern California. But there's other things besides just individual features that we can sort of collectively as a species agree upon what is beautiful. But there's always going to be people with opposing opinions. Nothing is 100%, nothing's set in stone. I've even had students come into class here who are sick of all the happy, pretty paintings, so to speak, and they just want to do the real gritty life that's there. And that's fine. And I know artists who share that opinion too. I certainly am not as attracted to those paintings as I am to those which reflect life, but also reflect the beautiful aspects of life. And that again comes down to our French academic phrase, belle nature, the beautiful nature, which is something that allows us to be honest to what we're looking at, but also present the most beautiful aspects of what that is. And those of us artists who are kind of tapped into walking a good balance between what is natural and what is beautiful, those are the artists who end up pushing this concept and producing these paintings that we can really get lost in because they're so realistic that they draw us in and we completely believe they're fiction, but they're also presenting us with something that's just inescapably beautiful that we have a hard time not being stopped in our tracks by.
When you decide your subject or content of your paintings, are you thinking about just what you're attracted to? Or are you thinking about will sell?
I almost never am thinking about what will sell. And not because I'm pretentious or anything, but because there have been so many instances earlier on in my career where I was so convinced that if I did this thing, maybe I sold it once and the gallery was really excited about it. And if I just do it again, I'd sell it. And nothing ever comes out of it. And it's just, it has gotten to the point where I've learned from experience that it's a very unsatisfying way of producing artwork. So quite frankly, all of the work that I'm doing now on my own, even in Open Studio, when I'm sort of designing a painting in Open Studio and constructing a painting there, it's all based off of what do I think would be really cool to have on my wall? Like, how can I either do something really interesting here or make something so beautiful here that I'm going to want to hang it up on my wall? And, I have limited wall space. We have a big studio here, but there's only so many paintings it can hold. And so I have a lot of paintings that are high quality paintings that are accurate and good and believable and nice paintings overall, but they just didn't quite hit that like super beautiful quality that I want to be hanging up in my studio. Especially, when we think about costs of framing or shipping if it's going to go to a gallery. A frame can easily cost a few $100s. Shipping can cost $100 or more on top of that. So it's an investment to hang a painting on a wall, at least hang it nicely on the wall. And so I reserve that right to the best of my paintings that I am in love with the most. And so my original goal with each and every painting that I do is to do something that I'm going to love so much that I don't want to have to send it to the gallery. And typically, to be honest, those are the paintings that the gallery ends up loving the most and ends up selling the fastest. Great example is I did a very large painting of a girl in an orange dress. The primary reason I did it was because I felt that the studio here needed a large figurative piece to sort of solidify its academic nature. And also, I was in love with the painting Flaming June by Leighton. So I wanted to practice this idea of tight.
Love Leighton.
Yeah, he's so great.
No.
I wanted to practice this idea of tight, somewhat sheer orange fabric. And also, I've got a project that I'm planning that involves very, very large full-size figures, and so I need to practice doing that. So this is a big 6-foot painting of a life-size figure, completely intended to hang on the studio wall. And I painted it and hung it there, and it had exactly the intent that I was hoping for. It really created an inspirational feeling in the studio, and people would see it and just be wow and attracted to that beauty and just sucked in from the hallway. And eventually, I had to give the gallery something, and I didn't have much work because I'd been occupied doing other stuff. And so I offered that one with a few other paintings, and they accepted the offer right away. And they sold it within 2 or 3 days. It was barely out there at all before they sold it. And so, oh, you know what? Actually, I take that back. The gallery had sold it before I sent it out to them. I sent them an image of it on, I think, like a Friday or something. And Sunday, they had called me and said, they asked me to verify what the price was because somebody wanted to buy it. And that was just with the images that I had sent them. And so at that point, it became, well, I have to frame it and get it out there and rent a truck and do all that delivery sort of stuff. But again, that was not a painting I had ever intended on selling. It was a painting meant for me because I wanted it. And so that's why I do paintings now.
Well, I think it's safe to say that regardless of, is there a standard of beauty? Probably, as far as our human nature goes, probably. Is it different for each person? Definitely, but even more so in making your art be true to what that means to you. So if you think a particular subject matter is beautiful and that's how you truly want to make something, then you should probably do that because that's probably going to give you the best results in the end.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You'll definitely be more engaged in the process,
Absolutely.
hands down. But one of the things that I have had to learn as I've grown, that some artists figure out early on and some never figure out, is it's kind of a weird concept, is sort of what's the difference between necessarily what you think is cool versus what you think is beautiful, and is there a way to walk the line between the two? And I think one of the best examples are skull paintings and drawings.
I'd stay away from cool.
Yeah, well, a lot of artists and students who come in love skulls. Everybody wants to draw a skull, and skulls are not necessarily considered beautiful by a lot of people's standards. And I've talked to people who've sold art and art from the 19th century. And in one particular instance, this dealer had told me that he had the most amazing painting of a dead soldier. It was an absolutely exquisite painting, done so well, great painting, couldn't sell it because nobody wanted to hang a dead guy on their wall. And right, and the artist who did it probably thought it was a really great idea and thought that this would be really cool, and so that's why they did it, which would be a good intent to do something like that if you never intend to really let it out into the world. But if you're wanting to connect with your audience, and this is kind of something that we talked about with Rockwell, if we're wanting to connect with our audience, then we have to make it relevant to them somehow. So we have to make sure it's beautiful enough or interesting enough to engage that audience. And so that's something that I think about too when I design my work. I'm not thinking, is this going to sell in a gallery? But I do think of what people might think of the painting. Because ultimately it's a communication thing. I am doing these paintings largely for myself, but I do also want other people to be able to look at them and enjoy them and have opinions, maybe stimulate conversation or get a reaction out of them in some way. If people just walked by my paintings and didn't say anything or give a second look, I think that would kind of be crushing to me. It's kind of like standing in the middle of a room shouting and nobody's noticing you. And I like to have people stop in their feet and sigh with, beauty or whatever when they see my work. And so I do think about that when I design things. But as far as subject matter, you really have to walk that line as to what you think would be neat, and if you can maybe merge it with what you might think is beautiful.
Yeah, I think, when I said I would stay away from cool, my point is anything that's too trendy. When I think of cool, I think of trendy.
Yeah.
And I think of a trend isn't something that lasts. That's what it is.
Right. Yeah.
And
for sure.
And that's what concerns me about making things that are too
in vogue
cool.
at the time.
Yeah. Because that's just not gonna last, and it's
it goes against kind of our
classic.
timeless appeal
Yeah.
sort of thing.
And I don't think that skull is necessarily a good example when it comes to that, because that's about as classic as it comes. I mean,
right, that's true.
It's certainly been used in art. It's a timeless image. It represents both death and life, which you can't have one without the other, which is something that our brains really can't understand. I mean, it's not anything. It'll always be interesting, I think.
It's just nobody wants to hang a skull on their wall. Well,
Well,
there's
I
a
don't
small
know.
percentage. There's a
Yeah,
percentage out there. There's always people out there. You just have to
yeah,
find the right person.
that's true.
You'll have a lot harder time connecting with the masses if you're always drawing dead things. Although you should draw a skull. It's a good training exercise.
Definitely. And as far as what you were saying before, your intent as to how you want your painting or drawing to read is is important because so you might think that it's coming across a certain way when it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important too to think about. It's
Absolutely,
like, oh, I'm going to
yeah.
make this beautiful thing and it's going to be this awesome thing and it's going to say this to those who look at it. Well, you better step back and make sure that's really what it's saying. It might say it to you, but maybe it's not saying to the majority of people that are looking at it.
Yeah, that's
So-
a fantastic point of view or comment there, and that's something again we addressed with Rockwell because even Rockwell said he would show his little doodle sketches to anybody who was walking by so that he could test out his idea and see if it worked on them, and if it didn't, he'd go back to the drawing board. And I know a lot of students who have done work for a particular a particular setup with the intent that it's supposed to mean this, and somebody else looks at it and means something completely different. That's something that's pretty common, and that's that has happened to me before. I've done something and said, "Oh, that looks so cool," and then my wife will come by and says, "Oh, that looks like such and such," and they're like, "Oh no, no, that's all I see." And then you have to kind of change or rethink how you might have handled something.
Yeah, well, that goes along with too, and that Rockwell study that we did was awesome when we kind of started with one thing and then built off that thing, and we ended up doing pages and pages of these little, what were they? The thumbnail sketches, and these were evolving ideas for paintings or drawings, and it was such a good way to remind yourself to never be so stuck on that first idea.
Right.
You need to push the boundaries, and maybe after pushing the boundaries, you go back and realize that first idea was the best idea.
Yeah, sometimes
but
that
most
happens.
likely it's not.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely, and we have to think also about time management again, like we talked about before, and we only have a limited number of hours in the day, a limited number of days in the year to be able to do paintings, and unless you're going to be doing all of primo, where you're doing a completely different painting each day, then we don't necessarily have a whole lot of time to waste on the really bad ideas. So it makes good sense to test out a lot of ideas in the preliminary planning stage before committing to a longer drawing.
You might think you're spending too much time planning, but really it's just going to save you time later.
Absolutely, yeah. Any of the big paintings that I do, the more I plan out and the more I stick to that plan, the more successful I am. And the painting I described to you of Dakota earlier with the flower in there, that took me a lot longer than some even bigger paintings because, again, I wasted that one day with the flower. I didn't stick to my original plan. But the more planning I do, the better the idea that I have, the faster things just tend to go overall. So I've really blocked in the basic value structure down here of the chest and the shoulder. I'm actually not going to develop it out a whole lot. My idea is that I want the amount of rendering to decrease as the distance to the face increases. So I'm going to try and fade out that shirt, fade out the hair in the chest area as well. The face itself is pretty much done, so it's kind of what it's at. And again, it's just a matter of taking careful observations and doing little fine-tuned measurements in that face to take it to the next level. And do I want to advance it further? If so, I'm going to have to probably get some binoculars and some super sharp pencils, and it'll probably take me a whole lot longer than I've spent so far, and I just have to be okay with that. I contemplated actually putting the necklace in, and I almost did, but I felt ultimately that, especially the large value contrast there of the necklace and the hard edges of the necklace might end up distracting a little bit too much from the face when it was an area that I wanted to really downplay. So my options would be to make something so simple and soft that it might almost border on looking unfinished versus just omitting it. And I opted to omit it here in this case.
Yeah, I think that was a good choice.
And that's just one of those compositional things that you'll probably learn after a while with some trial and error. Or even, you could lay it in and see how it looks, and then if you don't like it, erase it and go back.
If you added it, do you think that you would have to bring it to um, just a super finished level to have it work?
Yeah, I don't think I could, with the level of advancement that I've taken the face, I think I would have to advance the necklace pretty far. And then it would start to look out of place with this idea of everything um, sort of trailing off down here.
Yeah, it would probably end up looking like it was floating in that space.
Right, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's probably something I could figure out given enough time. But remember, we are on a time crunch. This is my last session with the model. I'm basically down to 20 minutes left, or 30 minutes left with the model. So a session and a half, and that's pretty much it. And I still have yet to do some hair. So I'm not really sure what I'm doing wasting so much time down here with the blouse. If I saw a student doing this with 30 minutes left of drawing, I would be kind of confused. Probably encourage them to go a little bit further north.
I mean, if this was an alla prima drawing, this would be like ultra developed. Like this area, I feel like this would, you wouldn't even normally see this much done.
Oh yeah, this would feel like there's too much there.
Yeah.
I would, yeah, if this was an alla prima, I would be probably handling this with big paper towel swoops or something like that. Yeah, it would be done probably in 10 or 15 seconds instead of 10 or 15 minutes. And then I'd go back up to the face and refine the face a little bit more. I do want some of this down here to look a little bit abstract, so I'm kind of playing around with ideas of how I might want this to trail off. If it's going to trail off softly versus if it's going to trail off with kind of these big, bold marks, which, I've seen some artists do. I think Cesar Santos has done this in some of his paintings, where he's just bold enough to throw some real thick, heavy, gravelly lines in there.
Some weird stuff.
Yeah.
He makes it work.
He does, yeah. I don't have enough time to play around with it. You see, I'm pretty much just stripping away all of that. And that is, again, it's one of my party lines here. If it's not working for you, if you can't figure that solution out, just start to omit information until it gets back to something that looks a little more natural, a little more comfortable. And then, if you have time, build it up from there. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. That plan did not work out. Kind of like that flower in the hair that we talked about. But was it bad to try it? No, I don't think so, because then, now I know for sure that it didn't work with this feel for the drawing. Maybe if it had been more of an alla prima direct sort of look to the drawing, it might have worked. But for something that's a little more classical and tight, so to speak, like this, it just wasn't an appropriate solution for trailing off that bottom. So I'm reestablishing some values. And this, now I'm not playing with any sort of technical challenges here. This is where now you're getting to see me play with compositional challenges. And this is stuff that's really difficult to teach. I can articulate what I'm doing here, why I thought that might work or whatnot, but again, there's not really a right or wrong answer. Ultimately, I'm thinking to myself, okay, what would I think of this if somebody did this in a drawing? Would I think it was weird looking and out of place, or would I think it looks natural and flow? What might other people think of this? So those thoughts are going through my head, and if I'm not liking the answers that I'm getting in my head, I'm just going to delete it. It's safer to have less information and be a little more discreet, I think, than to call attention to an area with too much line work or abstraction like that.
Well, I think it's another way to step back from your drawing or painting too, is to think about it as if someone else is doing it,
Mm-hmm.
as if someone else has made it.
Right, absolutely.
I mean, it's kind of weird, but it is possible to think that way.
Yeah,
And it helps you to step back and see it with fresh eyes.
for sure. Yeah, and it certainly helps that I've done so much teaching here, and anybody who's done teaching will tell you that just being a teacher teaches you a lot in and of itself. And I get in such a habit, being here all day, 2 days a week, basically critiquing students' work and giving them advice, that it really it becomes quite a bit easier to put myself in that student position. Walk away, come back, and oh, what were you thinking, Tim? I think you need to go fix this area over here. Some people in class think I'm kind of harsh or blunt with how I talk to them, but they should hear the things that I tell myself. It's a lot more blunt and unedited than anything I tell the students. Because I'm not worried about preserving my own feelings. If I don't think something's accurate or right, then I don't get hurt over it. I just tell myself to fix it, and then I do it. I've been playing around with that hair strand for quite a while now.
Curved line.
A curved line, really dangerous. I wanted to wait until I put it in to make sure I really wanted to put it there. All right, so I'm now settling into my last sitting, I think, with the model, or I'm just about getting ready to do my last sitting with the model. And my intent is to handle all of the hair at once, in one sitting. All of the highlights of the hair and all of the little ancillary hair marks and whatever, all the edge modulation of the hair in one sitting. We're not quite there yet, but it's just about there. And the reason for this is that the hair is going to change every single time the model sits up there. And I think the photo that we have here is actually from this last pose. I finished filming this, and then I said, hold on there just a sec, I'm going to take the photo for the picture-in-picture, and then I took the photo. And so as a result, the hair that I'm laying in now actually is pretty close to what the photo is going to be. Whereas if I had taken the photo earlier on, the hair would be completely different. So I'm treating the hair sort of alla prima. I've sorted out the shape. I've sorted out the overall value structure. It's just these finer details and subdivisions that I'm about to start tackling here. I don't think I'm not sure. I think I'm quite to the hair yet. Okay. Yep, yeah, I'm in. So we're in this last sitting here.
It's probably a good idea to save the hair till last too, and even, I mean, with this little amount of time, so that you're not noodling too much in it. I think it'd be easy to get sucked in.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I've seen students spend a lot of time in hair and draw so many lines that eventually just disappear because it's in the mass of the hair. So whenever you decide to hit it, whether or not it's the end or midway through or whatever, it's a good idea to put a time commitment on yourself. And unfortunately, hair is the one thing with portraits that we don't have a hair study day. We do the eye, the nose, the mouth, the ear, and then back to the eye. We don't do, okay, today we're going to do 20 minutes of hair. But it's something you should think about doing. And if worse comes to worse, best advice is just going to be to squint and try and capture the light and dark shapes you see. And then make sure you get to go back there and adjust some of the edge quality, because each of these strands that I'm erasing out here, I need to remember that it has a different edge quality all the way around it. And this is where you can run into some danger with getting hair that looks too stringy or like you just drew lines on there, is if you didn't modify that edge quality and you made the whole length of the hair the same value and the same edge, it looks really flat. So that secret there to good hair treat it as abstract shapes here and make sure you modulate the edge quality and modulate the value all the way down the shape. Again, it's not really anything new, same sort of stuff that we dealt with the plaster cast drapery, but we're just applying it to something that might have that potential to move. And if you need to, and maybe I did this here, I can't remember, you can do one half of the hair in one sitting, and then the other side of the head of the hair in the other sitting. So that way, at least you can kind of not stress about getting through that whole big mass of hair at once.
I always feel like the hair is, I don't know, kind of a break. Not a break. It's not that I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing, but there's, to me, kind of less pressure. I'm not working on their facial features.
Millimeters don't count here.
Right.
Yeah,
so it's kind of, it's a nice break.
Absolutely. I think you're right.
That cast shadow on the neck there is really effective. From the hair.
Yeah. That little bit.
Really simple, but.
Again, I think, like you said before, you just have to avoid that temptation of getting sucked in and noodling here. So notice I'm bouncing around quite a bit, all around this hair. I'm not settling too much in one spot. I want to keep things looking natural, not too rigid, and keep developing the overall relationship of these lights and darks shapes. And it's a good idea to just think of this as abstract shape time. You're trying to copy an abstract pattern. It's probably easiest for us to conceive this idea with hair, more so than with a nose or an eye.
Yeah, and there's usually a type of movement that's happening, whether it's straight or curly hair. There's some kind of sweeping, almost like drapery, except with more texture, really similar.
But keep in mind, you don't necessarily have to be super aware of the sweeping gesture of the hair. If again, we capture the abstract shapes, we'll kind of get that sweeping gesture. But while you're capturing those abstract shapes, at some point you need to step back and ask yourself if you have indeed captured the abstract shapes well enough to read as that sort of gestural flow of the hair.
Yeah, I've definitely caught myself, along that note, I've caught myself maybe getting those highlights in the right spots, but there's no connection. And I think that comes with just that refinement, kind of knowing where to pull and push, and like it's ended up looking blocky, I think is what I'm saying.
Right. And that's a good point too. It reminds me that we should definitely be varying the size of our shapes, and that's something we don't think about enough with drawing, because in drawing in general we tend to think more in terms of the linear quality as opposed to the shape quality. And when we get to painting, it's easy to talk about, make your brush strokes bigger here and smaller here. But we have to think of that in terms of drawing too. As we start to lay in these shapes for the hair, the lights and the darks, they can't all be the same size, and it's so easy to slip into that idea of just working down the hair, kind of making all these highlights or lights around the same size as you work down, with not enough angles or not enough variation of edge and value, and so it can look blocky or so uniform that it doesn't look natural. But we need to make sure we break some areas down to have really small shapes and leave some areas that have much larger shapes. So we look at the eye, for example. We see tiny little highlight in the eye, tiny little light in the tear duct, tiny little shapes all over in that eye, and it's foiled against the larger, broader shapes of the cheek, larger, broader shapes of the hair. But we need to have small shapes and we need to have big shapes. And I do think a lot of students struggle with this and they don't realize it. And it can flatten out the drawings if you don't have um, that range. It's kind of like having, not enough value range. It's just not enough shape size range. And then we don't get that sort of hierarchy of shape size. But here's a good way to kind of practice that idea or at least address that idea because it's a lot easier to do so when we're thinking about something as simple or abstract as hair. Yeah, a lot of this dark side over here, I don't think I actually end up developing too much information in. And it doesn't really need too much information. And if I were to develop too much information, it would actually start to flatten the hair out. And that's something I see in students a lot as well, that the light side and the dark side of the hair have about as much information. And so it sort of brings that dark side forward and thus flattens the whole face out. So we have to know when we can recede and push some areas back.
Yeah, and that wouldn't make any sense considering that side of her head is in shadow.
Right, but remember, the longer we stare at
Oh
something,
yeah, we want to
we'll see
draw
all
the
that.
hair.
Yeah. It's crazy what we'll do.
Oh yeah.
One of the rules that, or sort of philosophies a lot of painters have is to simplify as much as possible. Whenever you can get away with it, simplify an area. Only actually render or paint what you have to. And that will make you a more efficient drawer, more efficient painter, and it'll help your drawings and paintings look more realistic if you fall into that habit. Instead of the reverse, which is draw everything in front of you, try to find an excuse to simplify as much as you can, and then only render when you have to. And you'll actually find that your paintings look more believable, your drawings look more believable because of it.
Well, don't you think the part that you end up rendering the most seems even more finished in that way?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. And it's another reason why in something like this face can look so realistic because there's no background. Or if there was an abstract background there, it would look super realistic. But if I were to put her in a setting, the realism of the face wouldn't be foiled as much against the abstraction or non-realism of the surrounding area. So in this particular case, I've given myself a little bit of an advantage because it's easier to make something look more realistic when foiled against something non-realistic. It's when you start to put it into a setting where it becomes challenging to maintain that high level of sort of trompe-l'oeil realism. I mean, we saw with the plaster cast, to maintain that, I had to indicate some of the information in the background and just the right amount of shape size, and then modulate the value, modulate the edges to establish that depth of field as well. So there was some thinking that I had to do there to make sure that the plaster cast stayed realistic looking and didn't all of a sudden become less realistic because the background had too much information. It's one of those things we see in open studio too, where the background and the flowers or table next to the model is easier to paint than the model themselves. So we see students draw and paint. They'll work on the face for a bit, struggle, and then move to the background. The background ends up looking highly developed, as well as the surrounding area and the chair, and then the model's face is not as well developed. And then you have sort of the reversal, where the face looks even less realistic because you've made everything else look more realistic around it.
Yeah, and that just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't, not at all. So my sitting with the model for the hair has ended. I thought it was done in the last, and it was done the sitting before last. So it's actually pretty close to the photo, and now I'm just going and fine-tuning, finishing up the last little bits of information in here. Smoothing out that neck. That neck was a little too streaky for my taste.
Yeah, I mean, I think you run into the issue of when you're editing and you're surrounding your refined areas with areas that aren't so refined. You have to decide, like, is it going to be distracting if it's too simple, or
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's possible.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that happen. It's just too simple to work with the drawing or painting, and it just looks strange.
Yeah, maybe there needs to be a couple steps away from whatever,
Right, absolutely.
or a percentage-wise away from maybe 20% or something from.
Yeah, and certainly we don't want it to look like it's kind of cut out and pasted into a different environment. You know, we want the whole drawing to work together, even if it's something simple like this. And so you'll see, you know, kind of how I handle or am handling the shirt and the chest sort of disappearing into the paper. Also how I've stumped and softened some of the hair into the background to sort of facilitate a transition between the hair and the paper tone. I didn't just make it hard edge, again, all the way around the hair. I modulated the edge quality, I modulated the value quality so that it feeds a little more gently and has, like you said, a little bit more of a step down into that surrounding area. And you know, how to finish a drawing aesthetically, especially a study like this, is not something that you just know how to do. Certainly, I looked at a lot of artists to do this. All of my favorite artists, and especially Richard Schmid. And then when I started doing a little bit more tighter realism, I started to look at a lot of the guys from Grand Central Academy there, and you know, to see just how they would handle a non-finished drawing where it's not completely covered from side to side, and you know, each time you go into Open Studio, you're kind of comparing what you're doing to what they have done, just to have a little guidance on how you might finish things out, or abstract things in certain areas, or simplify things, or just not even draw them. Getting my final highlight in the face there, that nose. I want to make that nose sing. And I've still yet to really finish out the bottom of the drawing. So I'm kind of bouncing back and forth down there. Still working some of the edges in the hair. Now we've got less than 10 minutes left. I'm going around, you see I'm trying to just clean my stump, work those transitions from the hair into the background. Kind of what we talked about, you know, just get that step down into the flat background to appear a little more natural. And again, as I do that, you know, soften out some of those edges of the hair to the background and surrounding areas, it's going to make the face pop out a little more. Kind of adjust those hair edges a little bit. So, you know, for the most part, we're pretty much done. It's just tiny little minor adjustments here that I could stop here even with 10 minutes left, and it should still be a pretty high quality drawing. So it's just little sort of personal preferences, what's bugging me here, and I'll just keep working through each of those little things that bug me until time is ticked off. You know, if this was a personal studio piece, I'd probably leave it for a day or so, and then come back and see if there's anything else that was bothering me, or if I liked it.
Yeah, I think you probably shouldn't ever decide if it's done when you're right up on it.
Yeah.
Take a step back, be super honest with yourself. Is there anything that's glaring at you?
A lot of times too, you know, sometimes like really excited about a drawing or painting that I finished, and then I'll want to like post it right away. And I've actually learned to filter myself a little bit before setting stuff out on the social media, unless maybe I show it to my wife or someone who I trust and like, yeah, that looks great. Then I might post it right away. Otherwise, I usually give it a day or two to contemplate if there's any adjustments that need to be made.
Yeah, or you go to take the picture and you take the picture and you're good with it, and then you go to post it, and right before you post it, you see like 5 things that you wish you saw earlier.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But if they're small things, you can kind of just adjust them a little bit without the model and then maybe
That's true.
retake the photo.
That's
So
true.
hopefully, and I'm certainly guilty of that for sure. You take a photo and like, oh, this looks great, except for that one little splotch that's kind of standing out a little too much. That definitely happens. So I'm kind of doing one final check here, making sure all my core shadows are good, making sure that my cast shadows are the appropriate level of hardness compared to my form shadows. My value structure is pretty much set here, so it's just any final little adjustments of shape or micro adjustments of values that I might have. I have to be pretty aware at this point too to make sure that the adjustments I make aren't adjustments to bring an area to sort of the next level of advancement that would cause it to look out of place as well. So again, I've used those eyes to kind of key the level of development of everything else, and trying to strive for more simplification as I deviate away from that central area. And keep in mind, this is a 4-session portrait. In class, we have done a series of shadow mapping, like that last video that we saw. And then we worked on a 3-session portrait, and then we worked on this 4-session portrait here. And, 2 portraits where you've got to establish and work on values and edges is really not enough for us to say, you've figured out portrait drawing. And so it's really strongly encouraged that we hit this as hard as possible, both in Open Studio doing Hall of Prima drawings and at home doing longer drawings. But again, sort of that knowing when to finish it, whether or not you're just sort of spinning your wheels or whether you're actually advancing the drawing. Because, I've had students come in and say, oh, I've worked for 5 weeks on my portrait to turn in for the final project. That's kind of a red flag. Why should it take you 5 weeks? If you're drawing a few hours each day, 5 weeks is a huge amount of time to spend on a portrait, especially if this is sort of your first attempt at doing a long portrait. You're probably not hitting the level of development and rendering that we might expect. So make sure you're really objective and critically assess your working process and your final product. Give yourself enough chances at this to really have an honest shot at learning portrait drawing.